Well, hello. Hope I don't still have Krispy Kreme frosting on my lips. I had some Krispy Kreme donuts. But it's time to read chapter 7 of our mysterious shrinking house. So, with no further ado, you are at story time with the mysterious shrinking house, and we're on chapter 7 with Miss Gina at Gina's Planet. I'm Miss Gina. Hi. So, chapter 7, and just to give you a recap if you haven't been with us or don't remember, Mindy found a miniature house hidden in the attic of an old barn. It was so perfect it looked like a real house that had been somehow shrunk, but she never guessed its terrible secret, or that she herself would be trapped inside. Chapter 7. Late in the summer of 1915, a little man named Wilhelm Kurtz drove into the prosperous little town of Doppel in his shiny Hupmobile. He had set himself up in a small office above the general store, explaining, "Tired of being on the road? Tired of doctoring everything from burns to bunions? This is a nice little burg," he said, "and I aim to put some roots down here." It was understood that Kurtz was a man of property, with a farm over beyond Mosstown. However, to the disappointment of middle-aged ladies with rheumatic twinges, he did no doctoring. The shiny brass nameplate on his door read, "Professor Kurtz, not doctor." Day in and day out, he tinkered on a machine in the room above the store. "It takes up half that cubbyhole of his," said the electrician, who had come in from Bedford to wire some of the more prosperous homes and businesses of Doppel. "Why, it's got little dials a twitch all over. And do you know, he's got a little doll house up there?" He thought, "I wasn't looking, but I saw the little pipsqueak tapping all his fingers together and laughing at it." He's a tapping his fingers. "You might say, if you was to ask me, I'd say he was minus few marbles." The more the professor worked on the machine, the more desperate he must have become. Money was running short. For at last, economy had prompted him to give up the little office. Every penny must have gone to perfect the Kurtz wart and malignant growth reducer. Except that, knowing by then it could shrink a house but not a wart, he began to call it simply the reducer. He must have thought that if only he could understand the principle upon which it worked, he could devise precise controls. He brought his big old traveling doctor wagon back from the farm where he had left it, half dismantled the machine so that he could get it out the door, and trundled it back to his farm. But every Saturday he reappeared, for he had begun to pay court to pretty Miss Britomar Umstadt, daughter of the richest man in Doppel. When Miss Britomar gave him no encouragement, Kurtz had turned to Banker Doppel, father of the present Mr. Doppel. The banker was the second richest man in Doppel. "But all I need is $500, pleaded the professor. "And sure as eggs make little chickens, that little machine of mine will make me rich and you richer. It can't fail." Yet, when pressed for details, he was always vague. he could say, I intended it for a minor sort of medical treatment. But lighthearted experiment opened unexpected vistas. It works on a far larger scale than I had planned, but it is capricious, unpredictable. The difficulty is the controls, unreliable, but once perfected, it will revolutionize things. Say, the transportation of goods. Banker Doppel, a self-made man, was not about to buy a pig in a poke. Kurtz was not about to reveal his secret. No $500. Kurtz had grown purple in the face and screamed. A short-sighted, clutch-fisted old... That's what you are. I'll show you. And the banker had turned red as a beet and roared, out, 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 out of my bank. That did it. The next Saturday was the first day of the county fair. Doppel looked deserted as it slumbered in the hot, dusty sunshine. No one stirred. Even the dogs had gone to the fair, hanging over wagon tailgates or riding joyfully in cars open to the breeze. Grinning blissfully, with eyes closed and ears streaming in the wind, the town looked deserted, but it wasn't. Not quite. 5-year-old Samantha Botsweiler was in bed with the chicken pox, eating forbidden chocolates from a box beneath her pillow, while Nurse Etta Morrissey dozed in a Boston rocker by the window. The rest of Botsweilers had left for the fair in the cool of the evening morning. It's not an evening morning. Cool of the early morning. Let's try that one. That makes more sense. So, except for a few unfortunates, have the whole of the town of Doppel, and no one of the left-behinds actually saw what happened. Young Augustus Doppel, the banker's son, in the zeal of his first week on the job, was going over his bookkeeping accounts in the bank's inner office for the 3rd time. Just to be sure, pretty Miss Umstott was reclining on her pretty chaise lounge in her pretty bedroom, nursing the nervous headache that had come on the day before, when the odious Professor Kurtz had repeated and repeated his proposal of marriage. She had refused even more vigorously than before. There were others, too. The Reverend Artemis Edwards did not approve of such frivolities as fairs and had been working all the morning on the words for a new hymn. It was to be called The Voice Unheard, and the Reverend was so absorbed in it that for years afterward, Herman Goff had called it Wilhelm's Wagon Wheels Unheard. Mr. Goff, for his part, had heard the wagon rumble to a stop in front of the church next door to the boarding house where he lived. But when you have 2 broken legs and casts, you think a while before letting curiosity get the better of you. Mr. Goff had fallen from the church steeple a few days before, having gone up to attach a new lightning rod. Jack Crump and young Sibylla Butterball had been hard at work in the kitchen of the Doppel Inn. Sibylla Butterball, Mindy interrupted. Samantha hugged the box of candles to her tablecloth dress. Yes, the Reverend finally agreed to marry them after he settled down here in Lake Meander. The inn, as with every county fair, Opening day expected a large turnout of weary fairgoers, too tired to face cooking Saturday supper at home. Someone had to cook and someone had to scrape carrots and scour pots. So Mr. Crump and the shy Sibylla had been stuck. They were up to their elbows in preparation of soup when the professor's wagon, a church, and 4 houses already aboard had drawn up in front of the Doppel Inn. There was no one to see the tailgate let down, the aiming of the fantastic machine, the methodical theft of another bit of Doppel. If Doppel would not support his research in one way, Kurtz would see that it did so in another. He had conceived of the ideal of a traveling exhibit. There was money to be had in marvels. Just how much a marvel Doppel was, he would have been surprised to learn. He never did. All through the refurbishing of the houses to look like doll houses, and the 7 long years of traveling from one small town to another, and the years in busy Lake Meander, he never suspected that his house napping had made him a people napper too. And of course, when his dreadful nephew came to stay, we were twice as careful. "Oh," exclaimed Mindy, the light dawning. "This one is his nephew, then." Mrs. Bright didn't understand how her old Willie kept so young, but she didn't think it likely he would have had a son either who would have married him. Gosh, they never once saw one of you. All those years, Mindy dropped a pronged can opener into the laundry sack and they were filling with things possibly edible and probably useful. "No," grimly Samantha added, "young Willie had a kitten when he first came here. We saw how he tormented it. No, we have become very clever at being careful. But it had been a bit easier since the old professor died and young Willie stepped into his place, literally into his shoes and clothes. Ugh. Just so, but at least we didn't have 2 of them to watch out for anymore." Mindy glared out from the backless kitchen toward the large feet just visible at the end of the giant bed in the room off the museum. As she did so, they twitched, stretched, and swung unsteadily to the floor. "Scram!" Her voice was an urgent hiss. Samantha snatched up the sack and whisked through the swinging door after Mindy. Once in the dark hall, she chuckled softly. "I am glad you and Mrs. Bright are here. I am glad you're here. I won't feel so alone. Golly, I wonder what Miss Britomart would think you meant if you told her to scram. And there are lots of things to do here, you know. Out back of the museum, there's a nice weedy garden. I used to bring in samples of different little seedlings and mosses until we sorted out which were best to eat. Nurse Morrissey bullies even the Reverend into eating greens." Coming out of the front of the Buckle House onto the walk that was named after Doppel's old Grace Street, the 2 of them ducked from house to house, keeping close to the imitation shrubbery. They reached the end without incident, and Samantha led the way to a small side door to which she had a key. Mindy held the sack. "I wonder if Mrs. Bright thought up a way to get us out of here yet," Mindy whispered. She watched uncomfortably over her shoulder. Samantha turned in surprise. Her tone was half mocking and more than half wistful. Escape? Oh, no. Why, the old dears would never allow it. And that was all of chapter 7. And there were no drawings in chapter 7. And next time, we'll be on chapter 8. And how many keys do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's right. Next time, we'll be on chapter 8. So I'll see you next time on chapter 8. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. So Mindy's kind of in a pickle with Mrs. Bright and the others. They're trapped inside a miniature house in Doppel. They're at the Doppel Inn. So they've been shrunk. So we'll find out what happens next time when we read chapter 8. So I want you to remember to read more in 2024 and grow your brains. So I'll see you next time. It's Miss Gina. Bye-bye.